Osteoporosis. This is Jack Brook from Columbia Gorge Community College. In this session, what I'd like to look at is bone health and osteoporosis and touch base on the causes of osteoporosis and some of the therapy, especially looking at nutritional therapy to deal with this condition. So osteoporosis is when your bones start losing their bone mass and they start getting less dense, so they become thinner and thinner, especially what you would consider the bone matrix, their trabecular bone, which is going to be the first bone. It's kind of softer kind of bone tissue, easier to break down, and it's going to cause the bones to get pretty brittle and more porous, and the problem is it's going to be easier to break those bones or fracture those bones because they don't have the strength that they used to. Another term that kind of goes along with osteoporosis, osteopenia, is when you have a decreased density of bone, and that can refer to any bone in your body, but it may be that you might be diagnosed with osteopenia, which is maybe considered a pre-diagnosis to osteoporosis. And your physician may say, well, your bones are starting to get thinner. They're not quite to the osteoporosis stage, but we need to monitor that. There are three main types. Postmenopausal is the one that you hear most about because that would be in women. Advanced age, it doesn't matter if you're male or female. If you get old enough, you will have some indication of osteoporosis. Glucocorticoid is like an anti-inflammatory, or it's used for, it's a hormone that's used for different things. And if it's a chronic condition where you're taking glucocorticoids in a long period of time, then it could have an effect on osteoporosis. We're mainly going to focus on postmenopausal osteoporosis in this section, and advanced age, I guess, and not deal with the glucocorticoid because that's a different situation. So looking at the structure of bone on the left hand side, you would see what is considered normal bone. It's considered kind of a honeybee or beehive kind of bone structure, where there's it's not, it's got a lot of matrix. What you're looking at is a matrix, a lot of cross linkages and things like that. It's kind of like when you build a bridge, you have lots of cross linkages of the forms that give it more strength so you can distribute the weight. So this is what it's for, is we can hold a lot of weight. If we put a heavy weight on top of our head and kind of the vertical weight, we can hold hundreds and hundreds of pounds. But the situation would be if you started to walk, or if you moved to the side and you put an angle pressure on those bones, then this trabecular bone or these cross linkages are going to distribute the pressure and allow for it's kind of maybe more horizontal kind of pressure on the bone. Well, on the right hand side, you see where you've lost some of that trabecular bone, or that honeycomb kind of bone structure, so you're decreasing your bone mass. Therefore, if you're walking, the problems don't occur when you're walking, and you don't have to put any pressure, horizontally onto the bone. But when you get osteoporosis, you can see where you've lost some of that distribution of the pressure horizontally, so it becomes easier if you make a misstep or you fall and you kind of put some pressure, that horizontal pressure on the bone, that it can become a problem. So on the right hand side would be osteoporosis, losing bone density, becoming more porous, and losing strength to increase fractures. about 10% of nationwide over age 50. I just read a CDC report that said they believe by the year 2020 that half of our population over the age of 50 will have a problem with osteoporosis, because right now 10% are diagnosed. There's a high percentage that have no idea. I couldn't find any numbers on that, but 44% are maybe like have osteopenia or something like that. But they can see that their bone density is decreasing, and most osteoporosis you hear about is postmenopausal, and mostly so that would be women. So 80% of osteoporosis deals with women. But if men live long enough, they will get osteoporosis also. As far as costs, 18 billion per year. A lot of it dealing with fractures and things like that that occur because of the loss of bone strength. And then in Oregon, about 90 million. So, and increasing. The signs and symptoms, if you don't get tested for osteoporosis, then you would never know you had it until maybe you had a fracture or something, and then they said, ooh, the reason is because your bones are so thin. So unless you get it checked, you will basically never know, unless something catastrophic happens, that you have it. Consequences are because of where the pressure is in your bone, your vertebral column, your hip or wrists are very susceptible to that pressure and breaking with a fall or a sudden movement or something like that. So those are the common places, because you have a distribution of the pressure in specific areas that have lost a lot of that trabecular bone. If we look at the structure of a bone, up in here, in this area here, is where you'd find a lot of the trabecular bone. That's where going to be most of the pressures here. You can see here's a point of no stress. So that's not normally where a fracture would occur, but you're going to have a fracture up in this area here where you have the body weight coming down here, and so this is going to be more susceptible to fracture, especially if you're losing that trabecular bone or that honeycomb inside, and makes it a little bit more susceptible to that horizontal kind of pressure of the bone. As far as the causes or etiology, number one, you can have a decrease in bone cells. You have osteoblasts that actually add bone matrix, if you will, or add bone and make sure that the bones have enough calcium and enough of the matrix and enough of the density, and you can impair them. So we'll talk about osteoblasts. Osteoclasts are the ones that would disintegrate or take away bone, mostly for a good reason, because you're going to maintain maintenance of the bone. You're going to take away old bone and add new bone and things like that. But also you can think of bones as being kind of a storage area for calcium. Your body's main priority is to keep you alive, and blood calcium is more important than bone calcium. So you can think of bones also as a storage area of calcium for blood calcium. So we need to keep the blood calcium levels high. So if blood calcium levels are low, then you can take calcium from the bones, which would mean the osteoclasts would break down the bone and then put the calcium into the bloodstream, and you can increase calcium to maintain the nervous system and different things like that. So osteoclasts can become a role, especially if your blood calcium is low and your osteoclast activity is greater than your osteoblast activity. then you will be losing more bone than you're putting into the bone, and so your density would go down. Reduced nutrient intake, we'll talk about reduced calcium, vitamin D, and so forth, can also, if you don't have enough materials to work with, then the osteoblasts can't, put anything onto the bone because there's nothing to work with. And then excesses, sometimes we have nutrients that can cause calcium uh, to be eliminated from the body more readily, and so that's a problem because you reduce calcium levels in the blood, and then you have to steal it from the bone, and then it becomes a loss of bone density. So those are some of the causes. There are some risk factors that we really can't do anything about. You can't change, hormonally and so forth, whether you're male or female. Um, and you can't change when you go through menopause. Uh, you can have menopause in your 40s, or you can have menopause later in your 50s. So the problem is going to be, though, that estrogen is very important for bone or calcium absorption and calcium deposition. And so when you lose estrogen, you lose some of that ability. So if you have early menopause, then you have a longer period of time that you're not having adequate calcium deposition or absorption. But if you have menopause later in life, then you have, less time, because they say that, by the time you reach about age 60 or so, bone loss and stuff kind of slows down. And you kind of you're still losing bone, but it's not quite as fast as when you first go through menopause and stuff. So, I mean, 7 years versus 2 years, is a big difference. Genetics, I mean, if you have a history in your family of osteoporosis, then you're going to be prone. That's just the way it is. Everybody has different bone structure. People with very thin bones are going to be more susceptible. Ethnic groups, in this case, Caucasian, or you would say European uh, ethnic groups, are going to be more susceptible to that. Um, so those would be, your genetics. Diseases that you have in your lifetime and medications that you take can affect bone loss, history of fractures, that kind of thing. So there's things that you can't really do anything about that play a role in osteoporosis. So you can't necessarily be concerned with those, but you need to be aware of those so you can make sure you can modify things in your life and not allow it to happen. Okay. These are some modifiable things. Now, I've got this information from several places, and there may possibly be some controversy on this, or there may be some other opinions about this, but just let me give you what I have. Obviously, low levels of calcium intake are going to be an issue because you need that calcium to add to the bone to maintain it. Vitamin D is very important for increasing calcium absorption. That's a reason it's in milk, because they kind of work together. Vitamin D almost has a slight hormonal activity. And there are some individuals who say it should be more hormonal than it is a vitamin, but um, it will have hormonal activity. Hormones tell cells what to do, and so vitamin D would tell intestinal cells to increase absorption of calcium and that kind of thing, but also helps in calcium deposition, because it has blood ionization of calcium, and so that helps deposition of that. So vitamin D kind of has two things going with it. Protein, there is some evidence that high levels increase calcium excretion. And so if you excrete calcium from the blood, because the blood's going to go through the kidneys and be, if you filter out more of the calcium and excrete it in your urine, then you're going to decrease blood calcium. Therefore, you have to steal it from the bones, and so that weakens the bones. There is this may not be as big effect as they thought it used to be. I just read a report recently that says yes, protein does increase calcium excretion, but it does not increase your risk of bone decreasing bone density. But so there is a little bit of controversy on that. But suffice to say, if you're a heavy protein eater, especially meat protein or what they call heme protein, then you might consider, especially if you are at risk for osteoporosis, then you should consider reducing that amount. High levels of sodium have shown increases of calcium excretion. Low levels of vitamin K decreased osteocalcin, which gives strength to the bone. It's not part of the bone structure, but it increases the strength of the bone also. B12, low levels are going to decrease the activity of osteoblasts. If you remember, we said osteoblasts are what deposit into the bone. And so if you decrease their activity, then you are going to, cause a potential that the osteoclasts will take more bone away than you're being able to add. Phytoestrogens, which are phytochemicals that you find a lot in soybeans and wheat and things, they tend to help with estrogen activity, and so they can increase the estrogen activity for deposition and absorption of calcium and so forth. Other things you can do, exercise, weight-bearing exercise, is the more stress you put on the bone, the more the bone is going to respond by getting thicker. And you might have observed this if you've ever had a cast on your leg for a long time. You have to be very careful when you start walking again, because your bones have gotten thinner because they responded to non-stress by saying, well, we don't need this much mass because it's not being used, so we're going to get thinner. And if you do weight-bearing stress, then you're going to their bones are basically going to respond by saying, hey, we need to get thicker because there's a lot of pressure on us, so we're going to get thicker. And weight-bearing stress would be, obviously walking, running, those things, even the pounding on the pavement will cause that stress and cause it to get thicker, and then possibly, if you're putting weight, lifting weights and things like that. But walking would be excellent type. What's not going to be weight bearing would be swimming. Swimming's an excellent exercise for heart rate and aerobics and stuff, but it's not very good for osteoporosis, for weight bearing. Bicycle riding is good exercise, but not necessarily for osteoporosis, especially like in the vertebral column and things like that. So you really need to work and put stress on all the bones. And even when you do exercising and you're pulling on the ligaments and tendons and stuff, where you have that pulling on the bone of the ligaments, then you're going to cause an increase in bone, because there's a stress on pulling the ligaments and tendons and stuff, and so you put that pressure on the bone so they can get thicker because of that stress also. So weight-bearing stress would be something that you strive for. Strength, to rebuild muscles, because muscles can help keep the body strong and things. Flexibility and balance. One of the interesting things about one of the recommendations is they highly recommend, as you get older, you kind of lose your center base, if you will, or you can lose your balance a lot. And so there's a recommendation for like Tai Chi or yoga or something that helps you keep your center of balance. Uh, and so there's a high recommendation that as you get older and get older adult, you do some of those balancing exercises, things that will help you keep you from center of balance. Not that they will strengthen the bone, but they will help you from falling and keep you from falling and misstepping and things like that. So you can keep your center of gravity, so you won't fall and fracture your bones. So weight-bearing exercise, strength exercises, balance exercises, flexibility, those are very, very important, for not only increasing bone mass, but decreasing the possibility that you would have a fracture. Uh, Obviously, you should decrease your smoking and alcohol. Both of those are going to have an effect on osteoblastic cells. And so you're going to decrease their activity and suppress them, which isn't a good thing. If you take oral contraceptives, you might be aware of the possibility, if they decrease estrogen activity, then a possibility could be that they could decrease bone density because of estrogen's relationship to bone health and things like that. So you need to talk to your physician and pharmacist or whoever and find out if it is going to have an effect on estrogen levels and things like that. As far as prevention nutritionally, I've just put up some recommendations here. Calcium is 1200. There are some people who might recommend higher than that, especially teenage girls where their bones are developing up to maturity, and then over the age of 60 or something like that, where you're really losing bone. You'll start losing bone in your early 30s. And so calcium is very important, but the recommendation is, you get up to age 60, you may need anywhere from 13 to 1500 milligrams per day. Also, one thing you might be aware of is the recommendation is not to take all 1200 in one pill. The recommendation would be to split that up into 3 times a day because of oversaturation of calcium receptors on cells. I mean, there's only so many places that the calcium can attach to the cell receptors and then get absorbed into the intestinal cell and then get into the bloodstream. So if you just have a whole mega dose of calcium, some of it is not going to be able to attach to the cells, and so you would decrease the amount of calcium you would get into your body. So recommendation is split that 1200 into 3 times a day and eat it with food. Calcium likes an acid environment. And so it's better if you can eat it with food, so you produce a lot of hydrochloric acid and increase absorption, things like that. And then there are some calcium citrates out there that have kind of acidic things. And I mean, that's also why they would put calcium in orange juice, because orange juice is acidic. So it likes that acid environment. And another note, so does iron. So if you take iron supplements, you might take them with food or with something that's acidic, because it likes that acid environment. Vitamin D, it's probably one of the most talked about vitamins now in nutrition is vitamin D, because we get most of our vitamin D from sun. But if you're like most of us, you were especially above San Francisco, above Atlanta, Georgia, in this part of the country, we wear long sleeves a lot. We're not out, most of our work is inside. We spend most of our time inside, except maybe in the summer. And if you have long winters, then you're not getting enough sunshine to get vitamin D. So there is a high recommendation, especially if you're over 50, to take a supplement of vitamin D of about 1,000 international units per day. Now you have to be careful when you buy your vitamin D because you want to research it, because vitamins and minerals are not regulated, and so you don't know if the pill, in actual, I don't know how they get away with it. In actuality, there are some companies who will advertise or put on their nutrition statement that they have this much vitamin D, say, and the pill does not contain that much. So you need to make sure when you buy vitamins and minerals, they're from a reputable source. And especially if one's critical, like vitamin D or something's critical. So talk to your dietitian, talk to your physician about vitamin D and see if a supplement would be for you. And they're highly recommending that for everyone, but especially if you're over 50, and that includes men and women. Vitamin K, very important for many reasons. But at least this much per day. Sodium, 2,300 or less milligrams per day. Protein, 0.4 grams per pound. We get a lot more protein, probably twice that much we get in this country. So those are some nutrition recommendations that you might be considered about. As far as exercise, weight bearing 3 times per week for at least 20 minutes of weight bearing. Now the recommendation is get 30 minutes a day of exercise, and that would be mostly aerobic, but at least 3 times a week get 20 minutes of weight bearing exercise. Flexibility, balance, and 2 routines per day. So if yoga or Tai Chi or something like that to increase your balance. Alcohol, again, limit to 1 drink, especially if you have been diagnosed. So you need to be careful with that. So these are the recommendations. This is osteoporosis. It's a growing problem, especially in women, and it really needs to be addressed early. There is a rule of thumb that if you have children, the best time to make them aware of osteoporosis is kind of when they understand things, so about age 4. And trying to explain, especially if they're girls, trying to explain to them how important it is to eat healthy and exercise, especially weight bearing, because they are going to, reach maturity at maybe age 15, 16. After that, they need to maintain that bone, but during their most rapid bone growing years, they need to exercise, weight bearing, and also eat properly, get enough calcium and vitamin D and things like that. Very difficult because, as you know, a lot of times during the teenage years, adolescent years, girls will stop eating foods that are high in calcium and drink diet sodas and try to lose weight. And the problem is during your most rapid bone producing years, they are not getting enough of the nutrients or enough exercise to prevent, start that good foundation, because you're pretty much, once you reach maturity, you can increase bone mass a little bit, but not as much as when you're growing, and so you're kind of stuck with that amount. So highly encourage, if you have girls, to start early and talk to them about osteoporosis and talk to them about eating healthy and exercising and the reasons for that. And it's going to go a long way in helping the next generation to reduce the possibility of osteoporosis.